Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Babcock. Today we're talking about your friend and mine, T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot is maybe my favorite, actually my favorite poet of all time. I've got a few favorite poets of all time, and T.S. Eliot is definitely one of them. I think he stands shoulder to shoulder with about anybody in the English language. He was at the time recognized to be the great poet of the modernist era. Ezra Pound, who was his friend, and sort of Ezra Pound was kind of like the ringleader of modernism. He was a fine poem and a fine poet in his own right, but did a lot to sort of promote modernism as a movement. He was kind of a mover and a shaker. For example, he found T.S. Eliot, found a sort of a patron for him, someone to basically sponsor T.S. Eliot, give him the money so that Eliot could quit his day job at a bank and go full time into poetry. Even Ezra Pound, who again sort of the ringleader of modernism, looked at Eliot and said, "This is the guy." And it's been the opinion of literary critics at the time and ever since that Eliot indeed was absolutely top-notch. So we're going to look at three poems today to I hope to walk you through why how he has achieved such stature, why folks like me think he's just tops. To do that, though, the three poems that we're going to be looking at are not the ones that are generally thought to be perhaps his best. If you want to get if you want to go full Eliot, try The Wasteland. That is probably his magnum opus. We're not talking about that. What I want to look at is the three poems I want to look at. First, The Hollow Men, then The Journey of the Magi, and Little Gidding, finally, which is the fourth part of Eliot's four quartets. The reason I want to look at those, these three poems is this: The Hollow Men is it's shorter. I can speak to it in a shorter lecture like this. Whereas if I wanted to really get into The Wasteland, it's set aside 5 hours and dive in, right? So I thought The Hollow Men does a lot of the things that you can find in The Wasteland, but in a more sort of digestible way. So it's more representative of a mode that T.S. Eliot operates in, specifically the mode of what T.S. Eliot calls in Wasteland a heap of broken images. A heap of broken images. We get that in the Hollow Men. More on that in a second. But then I want to put that taste in your mouth, help you understand what Eliot is doing, when he's in that mode of the broken images. And what I want to concentrate on more, though, is that that's not all Eliot was trying to do. He also has these other poems, The Journey of the Magi, the four quartets, that I think are more in a redemptive mode, that do speak to hope. You read The Wasteland, you read The Hollow Men, you read Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, and you are just immersed in a here and now, a place of desolation, desecration, loss, a corrupted culture. But that's not all that Eliot has to give us. He's got more than that. So we'll look at Journey of the Magi and Little Gidding to see what he has to offer that is positive. Compare him to Nietzsche. Nietzsche said he thought with a hammer, and indeed, not to get too deep into Nietzsche, but Nietzsche was excellent at tearing down, a little bit shakier on building up. He's got the Übermensch. He's got other philosophies. He's got other ideas that are positive, but he's best when he's negative. He's best when he's tearing down. Not so for T.S. Eliot. And it's easy to think, again, if you just focus on his Magni Opus, his great works, you might think the same of Eliot. I think that that's probably a mistake. I think that Eliot has a lot more to do that's positive. So we'll get there. The first thing I want to talk about, though, with Eliot is his, whoops, there we go. There's my guy. There's T.S. Eliot. By the way, T.S. Eliot, born in St. Louis, emigrates for college, goes over to Europe, and eventually lands in the UK. Becomes a British subject. So he gets taught in Brit Lit classes. He probably could rightly and is in fact taught in American Lit classes too. We both claim him because born an American, but becomes a subject of the UK. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about in his actual poetry is these strange allusions that he uses to open his poems. So Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, we get these lines in Italian. Seo credesi c'è mia risposta fosse. You gotta use the hand if you're gonna speak proper Italian, of course. A persona c'è mai told. I don't know how to speak Italian. Is that obvious yet? Okay, so what he's quoting here is lines from from Dante's Inferno, which are, the quick and dirty translation here is, well, the situation is that Dante, of course, is in the Inferno. He's in hell, and he is descending through the 9 rings of hell. He's getting sort of a world tour of what hell is like from Virgil, the writer of the Aeneid. Virgil's taking him through hell. Okay, and as he goes, he meets some guy who had died fairly recently, and the guy says to Dante, he says, if I thought for a second that you were returning to the world, I wouldn't talk to you. But since there's no escape from this place, since no one gets out of hell alive, I can share the guilt, the indignities of my life, and so he agrees to tell Dante his own story, even though it's embarrassing to him, the speaker here. Okay, and then you go on, if you were to read J. Alfred Prufrock, which I believe we did for class today, he doesn't come back around to this. Like, it's like, you end the poem and it's like, so what did Dante's Infernal have to do with anything? So it is with the wasteland, nam sibyllum quidem cumus ego ipse oculus. Actually, I do know how to read Latin a little bit. Another sort of one-off allusion that's not clearly linked to the poem itself. What is it this time? This recounts in 3 lines the story of one of the Sibyls who asks for eternal life, but forgets to ask for eternal youth. So ages and ages and ages and ages, and can't die. And a bunch of boys, the Ili Pueri, those boys, Dicarent, they ask, what is it that you want? And respondebat illa, she responds, I wish to die. So what is the point of these allusions that T.S. Eliot starts with? I think that these are the kind of fragments that T.S. Eliot is talking about when he talks about In the Wasteland, when he talks about that heap of broken images. Broken in a couple senses. Broken is in broken off. Broken as in fragmentary. Okay, so it's as if in his imagination there's just these fragments from the Greek myths, fragments from, let's say, Milton in Paradise Lost, fragments from Shakespeare, fragments from Dante, just sort of floating around in his head, which must be true. His education was impressive. He studied Greek, studied all the old stuff, studied philosophy. And this guy, by the way, T.S. Eliot was, even if he wasn't a poet, he was a genius. Just in terms of what he was able to pick up and how quickly. Smart guy, okay? So he studied philosophy. He just had all of these ideas, these images, these snippets of thousands of years of Western culture up in his noggin. So broken is in fragmentary, and broken and this is a theme we've been talking about in this modern era in my previous lectures. Broken as in useless, broken as in desecrated. Okay. Remember, Thomas Hardy looks at World War I and he turns around and says, if all of our culture, if all of our religion, if all of our art over the past 2,000 years have led us to this place, to World War I, to the utter, annihilation of a generation of young men in Europe, if this is where our culture has led us, what's the use of that? Let's call it. Like this culture, civilization was a mistake. Hardy almost goes that far. I think you could actually say, given his quotes, he more or less says just that this has all been a big mistake. Let's let some other culture than Western civilization take the wheel because we have failed. So back to Eliot, he's interested in these broken images, broken in that they're fragmentary and broken in that they might actually be useless. But again, we're going to see as we get into his later works that he's not content to leave the pile of broken images there. Like Yeats wants to take Irish culture, sort of Anglo-Irish folklore, and create a new religion. T.S. Eliot isn't content to let the wasteland stand wasted. He's going to take these fragmentary images and wants to rebuild, wants to renew. He is interested in regeneration. I hope to prove that to you in the second two poems we're going to look at. But first, we must confront his sort of apocalyptic mode, post-apocalyptic mode, his wasteland mode. And I think the best way I can describe that to you is by just walking through the Hollow Men here. So here's the first part of the poem, the Hollow Men. Let's read this together. So again, we get not one, but two different little elusive snippets. Mr. Kurtz, he dead. Okay. And then a penny for the old guy. These have nothing to do with each other. The first line, Mr. Kurtz, he's dead, reference to Heart of Darkness. Mr. Kurtz goes native. Okay, it's a story of a guy who goes off to Africa, missionary, and by the end he has set himself up among some African people that he meets as a sort of like demigod, as like an object of worship. He has become completely corrupt, completely bereft of his old values, completely cut off from his past and history, and just sort of degenerates morally and sets himself up as superior. That's kind of as he degenerates, he becomes more proud in himself. And this is his moral degeneration. And he's like, according to the person who says this line, Mr. Kurtz, he dead, he's like a dead person, though he has set himself up as almost this prophet God thing. He's dead inside, and it's plain to see for the speaker of this line. Then penny for the old guy. Remember Guy Fawkes? Remember the 5th of November? Guy Fawkes, we talked about last semester in Britlit, was the gunpowder plot guy. He had a few cohorts, but he's kind of the guy. Remember those masks that Anonymous used to wear? The Guy Fawkes mask, the white mask with the killer mustache. That's Guy Fawkes. He was one of the first great terrorists, or would-be, wannabe terrorists of England, but his plot failed. So what are these references to? It's, like why, what do they have to do with what follows? Not super clear. My professor back at New York University, Dennis Donahoe, who I'll never forget, when we talked about T.S. Eliot, he starts the conversation by saying, well, I only met T.S. Eliot once. Only once? Oh, okay. Anyway, his idea was that, look, these are just literary palate cleansers. This is like the little pickled ginger they give you with your sushi. Just you take a bite and it sort of clears your palate. These references are just supposed to clear your mind and get you into just a generally literary headspace. Maybe. Let's go on. I'm going to read you this part 1 of the Hollow Men. We are the hollow men, we are the stuffed men, leaning together, headpiece filled with straw, alas. Our dried voices, when we whisper together, are quiet and meaningless as wind in dry grass, or rats' feet over broken glass in our dry cellar. Shape without form, shade without color, paralyzed force, gesture without motion. Those who have crossed with direct eyes to death's other kingdom remember us, if at all, not as lost, violent souls, but only as the hollow men, the stuffed men. I want to point something out to you here. Notice the bifurcation. Okay, there's the we and the those. And then there's death's other kingdom, as if to imply death's kingdom and then death's other kingdom. Okay, there are clearly two sets of folks, and I think implicitly, there are clearly two sets of folks, explicitly, and implicitly two sets of places. Okay. What is the here and now of the poem? The here and now is our dry cellar. Okay, what is this dry cellar? It's a meaningless place. It's quiet. It's a place of paralyzed force, gesture without motion. What is gesture without motion? That's meaningless. What is shape without form? That's meaningless. It's this sort of inchoate, unregenerate, not totally formed and not gonna be formed. It's as if it's potential never to be realized. And if potential is never to be realized, what is potential? Potential, by the way, comes down from the Latin word for strength. This is all weakness and paralyzation and sapped strength here. This is something like the wasteland that's being described. So let's rewind. Let's remember we just saw a clip from Dante's Inferno in front of Prufrock. We saw a little snippet of the Sibyl who ages without dying in front of the wasteland. Isn't it possible? Doesn't it seem likely that this wasteland is, hellish? Are we in hell itself here? Is that what this dry cellar is? You know, in the Bible, there's what is hell? Hell is literally a dump on fire, Gehenna. The term that Jesus uses is for a dump that was outside the city that was constantly on fire. Fire, brimstone, the worm that never dies. Okay, this is the language used to describe hell. And we don't see that here, do we? We see that in the Inferno. There's hell everywhere, fire everywhere. Interestingly, in the ninth circle of hell, the worst part of hell is not fire, it's ice. But there's no fire, there's no ice here, there's nothing. It's just this waste, dissolute, paralyzed nothingness. I think this is TS Eliot's vision of hell. Or if not that, look, there's this part in, towards the end of everyone's favorite story, Lord of the Rings. Sam Gamgee meets up with some of his friends who he thought were dead. And he says, Gandalf, you're here, we thought you were dead. Has everything bad come untrue? Has everything bad come untrue? Or something along those lines. As if something so good had happened in that story that it worked backward through time. Okay, something so good and redemptive went backward in time and changed all those bad things to good things. I want to suggest here, the opposite. Has something so bad happened to these hollow men that all of their good, that works backward through time, that all their good is turned to bad, that some future hell is working backward in their present life to diffuse all the good, to dissolve motion into gesture without motion, to dissolve shade into no color, to just sap the life out of everything. T.S. Eliot has sometimes been criticized as being too dry, too properly British a poet. I think the opposite is true. I think that his very British understatement belies the absolute fire and passion that I just love so much in him. I think he's one of the fieriest poets in the language. It's just he's haunting. He's hard to read. It's poetry explodes because it's paralyzed force, but it's explosive because it's kindling. It's dry. Okay. So we have two sets of places. We have two sets of people. There's these people with direct eyes, and in part 2, eyes they dare not meet in dreams, as if to even make eye contact is too much. To give you a sense for this, whenever an angel shows up in the Bible, whoever the angel talks to, it's just boom, flat on their face, terror, like every time. Every time the angels are just so glorious to behold that whoever beholds them falls on their face. Well, those who have crossed with direct eyes, we seem to see a bit of that split. That like the direct eye folks, dare I say, those going to heaven, have already become too much. Their eye contact is too much for those going to the other place. Have you ever experienced this? Someone who's just so passionate, or maybe a coach, a teacher looks you straight in the eye. Maybe your parent looks you straight in the eye, and it's just too much. And it's not even, if you're in trouble, that's one thing. But not even then. Sometimes they're just so passionate about some other thing. It has nothing to do with you. And it's just hard to maintain eye contact with this person who's just so direct, who's so alive, and their life is just flaring out from their eyes. And it's hard to maintain eye contact with such a person at times. I've experienced this. Am I crazy here? Maybe. I think that this is the feeling that Eliot is sort of creating here. Just a couple more notes. I want to move quickly. This line right at the end here. You listen to the wise men and women of history, and they're all telling you how quickly life goes. You have kids, and they tell you, everyone tells you how quick the kids will grow up. And that's true, by the way. That's all true. And then you get to T.S. Eliot, and he drops this one on you. Life is very long. Oh, boom. That hits me like a ton of bricks. Because T.S. Eliot is a wise man too, and he's right. Sometimes life feels way longer than it needs to be. That's just such a line. Life is very long. Might not seem like much to you. It seems like much to me. And I'll just read this last bit. Between the desire and the spasm, between the potency and the existence, between the essence and the descent, falls the shadow. For thine is the kingdom, for thine is, life is, for thine is the... This is the way the world ends, this is the way the world ends, this is the way the world ends, not with a bang but a whimper. Oh, this is just some of the best stuff in English. Why do I think so? Because this prayer that dies in the mouth, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever, amen. The ending of the Lord's prayer just like dies on his tongue. For thine is, life is, for thine is the... he wants to pray, but he's just so depressed. He wants to pray, but he's so listless and sapped of his energy. Between the potency and the existence falls the shadow. The shadow has fallen on his heart. And it's not the shadow of fire, it's the shadow of utter impotence, the shadow of dejection, the shadow of just loss of a will to live. And then this nursery rhyme at the end. This is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but a whimper. That's it. That is T.S. Eliot in a line, not with a bang, but a whimper. This is one of the most famous lines in poetry. We expect some big catastrophic explosion in the end, and T.S. Eliot says not so. This is not in the character of humanity. We are powerless, pathetic beings. And when we die, we'll barely moan. And there's just something so that resonates, that has resonated with me and with readers for about 100 years now about these lines. Okay, so that is, depressed yet? That is the wasteland mode of T.S. Eliot. But like I said, that's not all he has for you. I think that there is oddly comfort. What we talked about, I talked about Nietzsche's ideas in reference to Yeats, the tragic joy. I think there is tragic joy in the wasteland. There is tragic joy in hollow men. And how could that possibly be? Because isn't there a sense of justice there for the cowards? Okay? Isn't cowardliness its own reward for those who couldn't speak up, for those who chose to take the safe path, for those who chose to save their own skin, and they end up scarecrows in the afterlife. They end up hollow men. They end up shadows of what they should have been had they chosen to be fully alive, to be fully a human. But they chose not to be that way. And so they are not that way for eternity. I think that that's where my enjoyment of that poem comes out, with a sense of justice. A justice, by the way, that I am not above. It's not as if I've acted with courage and bravery and life at every turn. I too have been a coward. But at the same time, I can accept and resonate and even long for the proper ends to vice. The vice particularly of cowardliness, the vice particularly of a life half lived. Okay, of those who take half measures, of those who can't muster the courage, the faith, the energy to do what's right, and are happy to throw their lives away on what? Weed, on video games, on TV, and not speak up and not educate themselves. Such is their fit end. This should be rightfully terrifying. But there's also something about it that to me rings true. Okay. However, we're not going to sit in hell. We're not going to sit in hell. There is hope. I record this a couple days after Easter. Let's look at the hope. T.S. Eliot was an Anglican. Everyone was going this way. Everyone was abandoning the faith, and T.S. Eliot goes that way. I love artists that swim against the grain of other artists. T.S. Eliot is one of them. He's conservative in his sensibilities. He says so straight up. I'm not reading into that. He calls himself a royalist. That is, in his time and his age, a conservative. He is Anglican, okay? So he's conservative in politics and religion. And so he's interested in religious poetry, and this is one of the great religious poems of the 20th century. I think the only better one is perhaps Little Gidding, which we will end with. But Journey of the Magi, let's jump in. You know who the Magi are, right? The three wise men. This is the story of their journey to witness the birth of Christ. And, historically we think that they maybe weren't there for Jesus' birth, but saw him as a child, whatever. The poem says that they're there for a birth, as we'll see. Well, this is the story of their journey to the birth of Christ doesn't really sit on the birth of Christ much. It's really about their journey to and the journey back home and being back home, which is no longer really home after having experienced what they've experienced. Well, let's read through. A cold coming we had of it, just the worst time of the year for a journey, and such a long journey. The ways deep and the weather sharp, the very dead of winter. And the camels galled, sorefoot, refractory, lying down in the melting snow. There were times we regretted the summer palaces on slopes, the terraces, and the silken girls bringing sherbet. Then the camel men cursing and grumbling and running away and wanting their liquor and women, and the night fires going out and the lack of shelters, and the cities hostile and the towns unfriendly, and the villages dirty and charging high prices. A hard time we had of it. At the end, we preferred to travel all night, sleeping in snatches, with the voices singing in our ears, saying that this was all folly. Then, at dawn, we came down to a temperate valley, wet below the snow line, smelling of vegetation, with a running stream and a water mill beating the darkness, and 3 trees on a low sky, and an old white horse galloped away in the meadow. Then we came to a tavern with vine leaves over the lintel, 6 hands at an open door dicing for pieces of silver, and feet kicking the empty wineskins. But there was no information, and so we continued, arriving at evening, not a moment too soon. Finding the place, it was, you might say, satisfactory. All this was a long time ago, I remember, and I would do it again. But set down this, where we led all that way for birth or death. There was a birth, certainly. We had evidence and no doubt. I had seen birth and death, but had thought they were different. This birth was hard and bitter agony for us, like death, our death. We returned to our places, these kingdoms, but no longer at ease here in the old dispensation, with an alien people clutching their gods. I should be glad of another death. Death is life, life is death. Rather, birth is death, and death is birth. This is, I think, good Christian theology. This isn't just some edgy wish to die, like everything's bad, all birth leads to death. This isn't some stoic vision of accepting fate, accepting death, and just swallowing it and stiff upper lip and all that. There's more hope here. There's that line in the middle of the poem, finding the place, it was, you might say, satisfactory. This is, the word for this is litotes, Litotes, which is Greek for understatement. This is such a British line. It was, you might say, satisfactory. After all of his invocation of this hellish wasteland, of these denizens of the hellish wasteland, the hollow men, we find one thing in Eliot that satisfies, the one good thing in history. And this is the birth of Christ that they're talking about. This, all these pains all these sorrows that they suffered on the journey, not least of which, perhaps most of which, are the voices singing in our ears telling us that this was folly. Either memories of people telling them not to go on the stupid journey, or imagined attitudes of their friends and family back home telling them that they're being stupid. Okay. Amidst all this, they find what they were looking for. They do find, unlike you two, they have found what they are looking for, and it's satisfactory, and they would look again. Okay, let's look at the part at the break right here. Everything is cold and snow and refractory camels. Refractory means obstinate and disagreeable. I know the word because I learned it in this poem. Camels are refractory, if you've ever met one. Well, everything turns, everything changes right in this stanza. At dawn, first of all, dawn, sun coming up, birth, life, new day. We come down to a temperate valley. It's wet with life. Below the snow line, smelling of vegetation. So they take a deep breath, they're out of the snow, and there's grass again, and there's leaves again, and bushes and vines. With running stream and watermill beating the darkness. Okay, in the old folklore, vampires can't cross running water. You know why? Because running water is life. It's an old symbol for life. 3 trees on the low sky. White horse galloped away in the meadow. Okay, these living things, these living trees, these living horse, this living horse. Unless the 3 trees on the low sky. Does that evoke any other images for you? In the Old Testament, there's this line that anyone who is hung on a tree is cursed. The cross is often referred to as a tree. 3 trees. This must be an image of death. It is an image of life, and it is an image of death. This pale horse is an image of life, and it is an image of death. But these vine leaves over the lintel, that must simply be life, right? Like a growing thing. Vine leaves, grapes, wine, simply life. Unless the wine is blood. Okay. TS Eliot knows what he's doing here. All these biblical allusions that he's making in this stanza are life on the surface and our death on the surface, and are both. Okay. But again, he's not simply saying that life is death and death is life and so be it. When he says in the end, I should be glad of another death, why? For one, his real death, is that the word I want to use here? The death that the speaker will experience at some point, this Magi, is an end to his suffering. And what suffering is that? Having to be among an alien people. That the alien people, they're back at home. They're back with their own people who are now alien. They've been so changed by their experience that they can't go back again. Okay, they can't be home again on earth. This is the experience of Christianity. This is what the Bible was telling you about this whole time. It's not easy to be imagine for T.S. Eliot, do you think it would have been easy? All of his friends were too smart, too educated to go to church anymore. They all knew that it was no longer possible to be a Christian. And T.S. Eliot was trying to take this stuff seriously. And I think he did take it seriously. It's not easy to be the outcast. It's a pain to the Magi who have seen the truth, of Christ, and go back home and live among people whom they despair of ever persuading, who clutch their gods, and what can you do? You can't, if someone believes what they believe, you can talk to them, but you can't change their mind. And so they feel alienated, and they'll be glad to lose that feeling of alienation in death. And the poem doesn't say this, but if we're in a Christian context, and we are in a Christian context, to live as Christ and to die as gain. What do you lose when you die? Nothing. What do you gain? Absolutely everything. Finally, you can go to heaven. Finally, you can stop all this bickering and fighting. Finally, politics is over. Finally, history is over. Finally, you can get to work in heaven. Consider that. Okay. So this, I think, is this is a redemptive poem for sure. And the last thing that I want to go over with you is just a couple snippets from Little Gidding, which is the fourth part of the 4 quartets. So we are really looking at, this 4 quartets is pretty long taken together. But I just want to look at 2 parts of this poem. The first one illustrates T.S. Eliot's interest in the convergence of time and eternity. The specificity of a real place and a real time in history with the infiniteness of God, of the cosmos, however you want to understand it. Let's look. Midwinter spring is its own season, sempiternal through sodden real quick, by the way, sempiternal is just a longer way of saying eternal. Siempre, is that it in Spanish? Always. Let me start over. Midwinter spring is its own season, sempiternal, though sodden towards sundown, suspended in time between pole and tropic. When the short day is brightest with frost and fire, the brief sun flames the ice on pond and ditches, in windless cold that is the heart's heat, reflecting in a watery mirror a glare that is blindness in the early afternoon, and glow more intense than blaze of branch or brazier stirs the dumb spirit. No wind, but Pentecostal fire in the dark time of the year. Between melting and freezing, the soul's sap quivers. There is no earth smell or smell of living thing. This is the springtime, but not in time's covenant. Now the hedgerow is blanched for an hour with transitory blossom of snow, a bloom more sudden than that of summer, neither budding nor fading, not in the scheme of generation. Where is the summer? The unimaginable zero summer. Okay. Why is TS Eliot so great? Because he is able to gesture at things with words that are ineffable. You know what ineffable means? Unspeakable, unable to be, something that is ineffable is unable to be expressed. He is, I think, dancing right up to, and maybe even past, the line of expressibility. Okay, what do I mean? How do you explain this stuff? How do you explain time out of time? How do you explain this snapshot of eternity? How do you talk about eternity? These are things that you can't really get at logically, philosophically, but you might be able to hint at them poetically. Again, T.S. Eliot was a philosopher. He had studied philosophy. He was aware of philosophy. And here I think he's getting at something like a philosophy of time expressed otherwise. This is the springtime, but not in time's covenant. This transitory blossom of snow. Okay, in springtime, you see the blossoming trees, the Bradford pear trees around here that go white in the spring. Well, this is an image of springtime in midwinter. Okay, that the snow on the leaves is a type of blossom, and it's frost and it's fire and it's blindness and it's heat and it's cold, and it's these irreducible complexities, these juxtaposition of contraries married into one unproblematically in time and out of time. Again, it's hard to talk about this stuff. But do you have a sense for it? Do you have a feeling for it? You might not be able to quite process it here, but can you start to process it here? If you read these lines, he asks where, but what is zero summer? I don't think I can say, but I think I can wonder. Anyway, this marriage of this specific hedgerow, this specific blanched with snow, this specific blanched leaf, as image of something higher, something eternal, something cosmic. T.S. Eliot was very much interested in images. We saw so many images in the Journey of the Magi. Just things you can see and smell and taste and touch that you can't quite express the meaning of, but that's not to say they're meaningless. It's that the meaningless can't be said philosophically, but can be sort of experienced through image. Isn't that what art's for? For investigating, in among other things, for investigating ideas that can't be said quite. Okay, enough of that. Enough of trying to make the ineffable effable. Let's move to number 4. Okay, guys. This is good stuff. I hope you can appreciate what's going on in number 4, because it's just beautiful poetry, and it's true, and it's hard, and it's painful, and it's beautiful, and it's true. The dove descending breaks the air with flame of incandescent terror, of which the tongues declare the one charge from sin and error. The only hope, or else despair, lies in the choice of pyre or pyre, to be redeemed from fire by fire. Who then devised the torment? Love. Love is the unfamiliar name behind the hands that wove the intolerable shirt of flame, which human power cannot remove. We only live, only suspire, consumed by either fire or fire. Oh, okay. The dove. Remember the horse in the last poem? The horse that is life and the horse that is death. Guess what? The dove descending breaks the air. This is written during World War II when he is in London at the time, okay? At the time of World War II, the Germans were sending over, the Nazis were launching these V2 rockets, were launching rockets from Germany to London to bomb them. And these things would break the sound barrier. And so you'd hear this whistle after you heard the explosion. You'd hear it coming down after it had already, it was like backwards. Thomas Pynchon does a lot with this in Gravity's Rainbow and V. Anyway, this was an experience that Eliot had. And so this dove descending, breaking the air, breaking the sound barrier, is this rocket. But the dove descending, again, for a Christian like T.S. Eliot, you can't get away from the dove descending on Christ at his baptism. This is an image of the Holy Spirit. With flame. Flame is another image of the Holy Spirit. We just saw the Pentecostal fire in part 1. And in part 4, the flame descends, as if above the heads of the apostles on Pentecost, of which the tongues of flame, tongues, the one discharge from sin and error, the only hope or else despair lies in the choice of pyre or pyre, to be redeemed from fire by fire. Here's your choice, says T.S. Eliot. It's fire or fire. Guys, if anyone ever comes to you and tells you they've come up with a philosophy or a religion or just any way of being in the world that will free you from suffering, they are lying to you. There is no escape from suffering. The choice is fire or fire. T.S. Eliot is giving it to you straight. And, it's possible to, in America, it's possible to grow up, to get to the age of 18 without having suffered a huge catastrophe. Personally, this is not everyone, but it's some people's experience. These days, though, looks like we're headed for a recession. We might be headed for a depression. It's not clear if we're going to get a handle on this virus or not. Whether you're watching this, I don't know when you're watching this. I'm speaking in April 2020. Maybe it's not possible anymore to get to age 18 without personally suffering. But the suffering, at any rate, is coming, and it is the way of the world. Suffering is guaranteed. Suffering is baked in. And not just the suffering that comes from elsewhere, but the suffering that comes from right here. Okay, the suffering of doing wrong and knowing that you've done wrong, and the penalty for doing so, T.S. Eliot affirms, is real. Here's your choices. It's fire or fire. You can go your own way. You can comfort yourself with all the vices, but talk to an addict. Talk to someone who's given themselves up entirely to good feeling, to pursuing feeling good all the time. Spoiler, they don't feel good all the time. The choice is fire or fire. You'll suffer this way or you'll suffer that way. You can pick, but there is no escape. We only live, only suspire, consumed by either fire or fire. Now, I don't want to leave you on that note, and I don't think T.S. Eliot wants to leave you on the note of pure, unmitigated, certainly not eternal suffering. There is something that is satisfactory in T.S. Eliot, and that's Christ. And what does Christ do for us? Well, he gives us charge from sin and error, our only hope, or else despair. It's his pyre, not our pyre. He'll take the pyre for us. We still experience fire, but fire is not, I've been talking about it as if it's merely a symbol of suffering, and it is a symbol of suffering. It's a symbol of passion. To have a heart on fire is to suffer. To have passion for X or for Y, I'm passionate about the plight of the poor. That is a type of empathy. That is a type of suffering. To feel passionate about the poor, isn't it? Because it means that you see something not right and it causes you pain, and that pain motivates you to do something. Right? That's a type of suffering. And it's a type of fire. But fire is not, in the Bible, always only suffering. God is fire. God is the flame that burns the bush but doesn't burn it. God is the tongue of fire. The Holy Spirit is the tongue of fire above the heads of the apostles. Fire is life. So the symbol, it can't be taken in one way. It begs to be taken in more than one way. So consumed by either fire or fire. Will you be consumed like the trash in Gehenna? Or will you be consumed like the bush was consumed, that burned but wasn't burned? Will you be consumed like the apostles were consumed, who burned but didn't burn, who lived? All right, guys. We'll end there. We'll see you next time.